Hello, Andy. Such a pleasure to talk with you. We have 1
Hi.
hour together, and I want also to say hello to the people who are watching us. We are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. It's gonna be really an interesting topic, and it's about the brain, it's about leadership, and much more than that. So before we start, for those who don't know us yet, so let's do some introductions. So I'm Christine Billy. I'm professional coach, passionate about understanding the mind and the link between the mind and the body, so passionate about health. And I have the pleasure to lead this discussion with leaders who are exploring also these topics about health, leadership, and how we are connected with others. How can we be successful and happy? Okay. So today I have the pleasure to have Andy Habermacher with me for this hour. We will share about what he has done since many years now. And I will introduce Andy by saying that he's really an expert, in the brain and the brain in the workplace. So expert in neuro-leadership, the founder of Leading Brains. So he has, published a lot about the topic and the psychological aspect of the workplace performance. I'm also very passionate about what we name high performance. So I'm so excited to talk about this. So employee engagement, leadership effectiveness, decision-making, and health. And has been co-developing a tool to measure the motivation. And we will dig into this topic as well. And enjoys to spread knowledge in the broader community. And that's why I have the pleasure to have you, Andy, with us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for that introduction.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's start, with this discussion. So can you share more with us about the brain? We are talking about the brain, neuro leadership. What are we talking about when we say neuro leadership, or the power of the brain?
I'll start with neuro leadership rather than the brain, because the brain is a very big area. So let's understand neuro leadership and some of the maybe history and some of the maybe expectations and failed expectations over the years. So neuro leadership basically says let's take this stuff that started happening to a great extent in the 1990s, which was a lot of brain research started exploding in the 1990s, and let's think of how we can apply this to leadership context. Instead of looking to classic psychology or leadership literature, let's look to brain to understand the brain. Or simply put, why do people do what they do? And how can we explain it in terms of brain science or neuroscience or neuropsychology, I would say would be a better way of doing it. So the reality is, what neuro leadership is, it's a combination of the cognitive sciences, I would say, rather than just neurosciences. The cognitive sciences, which include psychology, includes cognitive psychology, includes cognitive neuroscience, includes what's called biological neuroscience, and thinks of how this impacts in the workplace. Let's say that's the broadest level. Now, within that, there's a couple of things which are interesting, slightly controversial as well. So the one slightly controversial thing is, does neuroscience do something that other disciplines don't do? What does it bring to the table? That's like been a big criticism. Same in economics. There's a field of neuroeconomics, saying, does this give you something more than if you just read a standard leadership book? Can you get more information? And the answer is yes and no. And I'm always quite honest on this. I'm quite forthright. because I read a lot of science, so I end up being very scientific in my response, and if there's no benefit, I say there's no benefit. If there is a benefit, I say there is. There's 2 or 3 things that it really benefits. First of all, is it gives a very concrete way of describing things. So the really simple example is if you describe fear, in a psychological term, you say fear is bad. You say to a leader, fear is bad for employees. You should make sure they're not afraid in the workplace. And the leader will say, yes, I know, but we have to produce this much. So I don't care if they're afraid as long as they produce. So that's the classic response from a leader. They kind of know it's bad, but they still do it, or they go to a default mode. Then they'll say, okay, let me show you what happens to the brain when there's fear engaged. And then I can show a very simple pattern, or in more detail if they know a little bit, which is how the emotional centers overactivate, or certain parts overactivate, other parts of the brain deactivate, like cognitive ability to think in complexity, ability to think creativity, that shuts down. Then you get over-emotionality and over-responsiveness. So you get, an emotional, responsive, non-cognitive, non-creative response, and then it either overactivates the system or underactivates the system. So either you get people running around like headless chickens, or you get people stop making decisions. Then I show this model. I say, these things are happening in your business, and that's an afraid person's brain. Do you want these brains in your business? And then, of course, they say, of course not. Definitely not. How can we get against this?
Yeah.
And then you can then also focus on those specific areas, say, okay, different people responding differently. This is how you can then respond to that. So it gives you a clearer framework to think through some of these psychological concepts. The concept of fear and performance is not new, but framing it in neuroscience terminology gives you much clearer way to think about it, and also a clearer way to think about the responses. So that's kind of like one of the big things about neuroleadership, is doesn't necessarily give new insights, but gives a real nice framework and a concrete framework to counteract it, or to think about certain issues.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing. Now, the other thing is that there are just interesting insights which are, let's say, counterintuitive as well, or explain why some people say, oh, we need attachment, or we don't need attachment, or relationships are important, they're not important. And if we look at the brain and the receptors for oxytocin, we can say there's different receptors, so we know different people respond differently to the same chemical. So it gives you very clear answers to people who are arguing in different ways as well. And if you look in the brain, you can say, well, basically you're looking at 2 different brains. So it gives this concreteness and this real clearer way of thinking through many of these issues, instead of arguing on this psychological terminology, saying some science says this, some science says this. You can say, well, just look at brains and we can find the answer.
So it gives people something concrete to understand what's going on when they are in a certain situation where they feel pressure, tense. You are talking about the fear, because we know by experience that unfortunately emotions were not really accepted in the workplace for a long time, and but they were there, right? So it's not because they were not accepted that they were not there. And so it was like, we were talking about the big elephant in the room. So it was there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you are showing that, concretely, that it was there, right? They were there. And
absolutely. So you can show it's there. But I mean, if we come back to the concept of emotions and emotional leadership, and obviously, the concept of emotional leadership, emotional intelligence came up in the 1990s. Also, at the same time, there's lots of brain research coming up. We can essentially also say that the brain is driven by emotions. Emotions are the fuel of the brain. And we confuse a little bit emotionality with emotions, because being successful, for example, which all businesses want to do, individuals in some way, shape, or form, that's driven by chemicals in the brain, which are essentially emotions. So it's an emotional drive. So this is why we talk about emotional drives. we're normally confusing emotional drives, which are, let's say, the big long-term emotions, which are super important for business, and short-term emotionality, where you just, up and down, within a day or between days. But again, the brain science can point to that and point to why these are important, and also to why emotions could, rocket up and rocket down, within a day or between days, and disrupt thinking patterns and decision making.
Yeah, so this has been useful to show concretely to people what's happening when we interact together, and when there is decision to make, or we feel pressure, and I mean, we have to acknowledge it's still very present. Fear is still very present in the workplace. So what would you propose to move forward with, acknowledging that fear is not helpful, and that we should approach things differently in the workplace? Do you have some, insight for people listening to this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. Fear is often spoken about in neuroscience circles, and for the obvious reason, it's a primeval emotion. It's very present, and it can be activated in multiple different ways. So and again, I tend to think of 2-3 things, and then we've got the related concept, which is anxiety. Fear is kind of like very intense, immediate, but then we got anxiety, which is kind of like a low-level concept, going below the whole, like a stream going below this. So say, first understand what we're talking about, and then there's lots of misconceptions about fear. People say, oh, but they're afraid of that, or they're afraid of success, or they're afraid of that. And we're talking about slightly different concepts. So I think the first thing is understand the difference between these concepts. When is it fear? When you kind of really think, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job, and I can't feed the family, and that's fear. Then there's low-level anxiety, which is often called fear, which is slow worries sitting in the background a bit, but it's a constant low level of stress, which of course is still disruptive over time. So think of anxieties, and some of these anxieties are things like worried about making mistakes, worried of looking stupid, worried of not performing. That's kind of an anxiety level. I wouldn't put it a fear, because fear is a powerful thing. So that's a low level anxiety. What I'd come back to is two things. First of all, understand your personality type, first of all. And there's been a bunch of research around people and the brain mechanisms of people who are achievement focused and people who are fear focused. There's, on LinkedIn, I think you saw, I wrote an article recently on whose brains respond to carrots, the reward, whose brains respond to sticks, punishment. So there is a personality type, and the personality type simply says your brain responds much more sensitively to kind of fear-based constructs, and other people's brains respond more to reward-based constructs. So there is a personality type. So this is why I say be careful of just saying fear, because we've got different personality types. Some people really kind of like ignore the fear and just go for it. These are also classically entrepreneurs or people in startups. So there's different brains respond differently. So first, understand yourself, of course. Do you respond intensively to the negative side? Do you respond to the positive side? If you're in a business then, and if you're leading either a team or others, then you have to understand what are your people. Are they reward focused, or are they more, anxious, fear focused? Those people who are achievement focused, they're not worried about making mistakes. They just go for it. They'll go for it. They're the go-getters, and there's quite a lot. And again, on average, it's around, it's as usual. It's around 50%. But of course, everyone falls quite closely to that middle area. Then you'll get, a an outlier about 20% to really extreme, and 20% to extreme, achievement focus, was 20% to fear focus. So essentially what we need to focus on, and this has been a well-known theme, is psychological safety is an important theme there. And the reason psychological safety is an important theme is it just really enables performance of that group of people who are more anxious, naturally more anxious, slightly more anxious, or if there's particularly anxious situations like a pandemic, So it's creating that psychological safety, and that psychological safety revolves around a number of things. I'll probably speak in a bit about emotional needs, but this concept of emotional needs satisfaction. But it's also giving clear context, a clear future. Something like the pandemic ramps up the fear systems, and so our antennas are kind of super active, and we're kind of listening around, and things go, oh my God, we're going into third wave. Oh my God, this is happening. Oh my God, it's going to take another year. Oh my God. So there's all this happening, and that creates insecurity all around. So businesses should be creating security at least for periods of time. Rather than saying, hey guys, it's going to get better sometime in the future, say, hey guys, this is what's happening in the next 6 months. In the next 6 months, we're going to be doing this, and this is not going to change. So you have to give kind of like as much security as you can for a clear period of time, because that creates that psychological safety. If you just go, hey guys, don't worry too much, lots of bad news, it'll get better sometime in the future, your brain is still going nuts, you're going crazy. Instead of saying, hey guys, we're not going to change anything for the next 6 months, or we're not going to change anything for the next year, or we've made this clear decision. So giving as much clarity, giving a vision, given a clarity, and given as much stability as possible.
Yes,
that's really
absolutely. So we see that a lot in coaching, and especially working with teams where it's really important to have clarity, alignment around the vision, and then adjust to the different personality needs and motivations of the people to create this trust that this is going to happen. We are going to make it happen. Yeah. So. Okay, so what you describe is that we are responding differently to what we perceive in the environment. And maybe it's a good time to make the link with this scope, motivation. Is it? What do you think? Could we make the link with that now?
Oh yeah, for sure, because so as you said, scope. So scope stands for, it's SCOAP. So it's a model we built quite a few years ago now. So when I wrote a book with the German colleagues, Professor Theo Peters and Narjan Gadiri in Bonn in Germany. They wrote a book on neuroleadership. I came on. We rewrote the book together. I updated it in English. And we proposed this concept of emotional needs as core drivers. So we said, okay, so far, classic neuroleadership has taken a couple of things, like looked at fear and translated that to leadership, and then looked at a couple of other things like reward mechanisms in the brain. We took a step back and said, let's look at, let's say, a broader level of human behavior, what's driving behavior on average, in general, across large population groups all the time. And Professor Peters and Arjen Gadiri had come across the work of a neuropsychotherapist, Klaus Grave, that's Grawe. He's unfortunately died shortly after he wrote his books, quite suddenly. But he came up with quite a big theory of saying, essentially we can match all these emotional circuits in the brain to actually fundamental emotional needs, because these are the fundamental needs that activate all these circuits in the brain, and trigger the positive things like reward, but brain growth, and so on and so forth, or they trigger the negative things like stress, brain disruption, disrupted cell growth in the brain. And we can boil it down to emotional needs, psychological needs. We call them emotional needs because they're emotional drivers that drive. So these needs are SCOAP, so that's self-esteem, control, orientation, attachment, and pleasure. So the simple principle is this: we were all driven to some extent to fulfill these, so as a motivational construct, and we're also driven to protect these to a certain extent. So if you have high self-esteem, we want to protect our self-esteem to a certain extent. We want to make it better, but we also have defensive mechanisms as well. And at this stage, we don't say, is that good or bad? We just say that's the natural way of behaving. Animals do it. All animals do it in some way. All human beings do it in some way. So we have these mechanisms which are driving our behavior. And if you think of life, what we're all trying to do, we're trying to get a greater sense of self-worth, you know, to be valued, to be appreciated, to be recognized, to gain some control over our life, you know, be able to control what we're doing, how we're doing it, when we're doing it. We have orientations, you know, where we're going, how we're going to get there. We have attachments, we build these relationships. And of course, we have pleasurable experiences. So simply put, if you have more of that, you're going to be better in life. And if you have less of that, it's going to be worse in life. So you know.
We all share these 5 needs. The level, I mean, the level of the needs of each differs depending on individuals. Is that?
Exactly. So that would be the next thing. So first, these are very general patterns. Now, some of you may question, or some of you may say, why not the SCARF model by David Rock, or why not self-determination theory, or why not? So we've published a paper at the end of last year. It's called Describing the Elephant. So you can Google that. It's an academic paper. We've analyzed basically every other needs model there is, or academic needs model. So that's 54 needs models we analyzed from over centuries of research, and given the rationale of why it matches perfectly to the scope concept, or can be perfectly matched. There's a lot of rationale. This is not, I normally stress, it's not just a little theory. This is a big theory. Now, what you said is really important there, because of course we can say, okay, everyone needs self-esteem, but everyone needs self-esteem in different ways and to a different degree. That's the personalized level. You know, some people might need, let's say, sporting success, and other people don't care less about sport. You know, other people want academic success. You know, so it's completely different, or completely. We normally have, just about everyone has an aspect of it, but it's built in different ways. You know, one, through your genetic propensity, you have certain genetic propensities and how the chemicals operate in your brain are programmed to operate. 2, of course, through your, you know, socialization, your whole life, you know, what you've built up through your life, your experiences, what you experience. So this builds up a model of this, of these needs, and hence they're different for different individuals. Now, this comes back, if we take this straight back to the leadership question, and what you also just said is, so if I'm a team leader, so if I'm leading a small group of individuals, I'd like to know how those individuals are going to operate on those particular needs. That gives me a lot of useful information. If I'm a leader of an organization, I say a particularly big organization, I can't know how many 5,000 needs, but I can say on average, we know we have to fulfill those needs. So we have to give people the opportunity to fulfill their self-esteem. We have to give them control, which normally means autonomy and choice. We have to give them clear orientation. We have to enable attachments to be built, and we have to enable them to have a pleasurable experience at work, you know, and that will then give you basically a positive brain.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And I guess you must have, you know, observed, you know, because we are in a very specific situation, right, with this pandemic since last year. You must have observed, you know, the impact of this change, this big change in the environment, and how we could use your model to move forward. Is there something you want to share about this?
So exactly. So first of all, we have to think, you know, and again, we have to think for ourselves, first of all. So first of all, and again, you know, for me, this was also obviously, you know, I went through the journey of researching this, analyzing this, writing about this, but obviously also experiencing it myself. So I went through my own self-discovery experience of saying this. And I have to say, you know, with this clear understanding of saying, this is actually my emotional, these are the needs I need to fulfill, and if I can fulfill these needs, it's going to be, or I have to compensate in some other way, shape, or form. So what's happening in the pandemic, and the reason emotions are rising high, is because you can see a number of needs are violated, and sometimes quite dramatically. So, for example, since we have lockdowns, it's clear violation of the need of control. Suddenly you are told you can't do that, and your freedoms are restricted to a certain extent because you can't go to the sports club, or you can't go to a restaurant, or you can't go to a party, or you can't visit your family. So there's an immediate impact on control. From the brain's perspective, then, or our theory, that means there's an immediate increase in stress. Because as soon as you violate a need, you're going to increase stress. The second thing there's an obvious impact on then is orientation. We're not 100% certain when it's going to finish, how it's going to finish, what the timeline is. So again, the brain is automatically in a stress state. So you increase stress again. A couple of other things are obviously impacted then. Attachments, can't meet friends, can't, we can, call, Zoom, but it's not quite the same as, having a family party or going to a restaurant together. So you're impacting attachment, and then of course at the same time pleasurable experiences. There's a bunch of pleasurable experiences, so you can immediately see there's an immediate impact on emotional needs, which is going to give an immediate negative impact on a stress response. That stress response can come out in different ways. Could go into sort of more depressive symptoms, and there's a bunch of people who have been seen to go through this, suddenly get really down and really depressed, and oh my god, I don't know when it's going to end, and can't wait to see my friends. Or it can also translate into anger as well, because that's also a stress response. So you can see this anger coming up, and these anti-government protests coming up, and that's simply just the anger coming out that's been stimulated through a violation of scope. And so essentially what's happened there, and the criticism of governments, even though I have to say it's a really tough thing to deal with. I don't want to be overly critical, because it is a really hard thing to deal with when you're dealing with the whole population and you have lots of different opinions. So I have a lot of sympathy for governments as well. But there's been some things they really could have done better, which is, given really clear orientations, given really clear guidelines, being much more structured, enabling some things to happen that should happen, which could be things like movements. The countries who had really strict lockdowns where you couldn't leave the house. In my mind, that wouldn't make sense, because the research shows there's very little transmission outdoors. It's a really minimal risk, and the negative impact of lack of control, lack of movement, lack of exercise overrides, in my mind, giving that sense of a little bit, giving some freedom back to people. So there's been a bunch of things happening. Now then, when we've got that, we know this is happening in society, then of course we have to think for ourselves. Say, okay, what's impacting us, and then, if I've lost control, back to the simple questions: what can I control? I need my control needs violated, so how can I engage in getting back control for myself, or as much control as I possibly can? Same with attachment. If I have attachment, okay, so how can I gain back as much as that attachment? Could be Zoom parties, Zoom coffee meetings, regular contact with the family. Doesn't 100% replace the real stuff we know, but it still has a positive impact and helps to minimize some of those effects. And the same goes for pleasure. One piece of research which I wrote
sharing with us is that the power of having a model like this is that when there is a disruption in your environment, if you know yourself well enough, and for example, you know that control is something very important for you, you can then develop a strategy for yourself to feel better, okay? An appropriate strategy, because otherwise, you may be overwhelmed with the emotion without even knowing how to manage that, right? So it's and the same for others. If you are a leader and you need to take care about the people around you, and if you know their profiles, then you can adjust what you say or what you do to each person to fulfill this need for feeling good, right? In the different circumstances.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I give an example there, which we just done a piece of research with a number of companies looking at virtual working in the workplace, and we measured also emotional needs. Now, what we've seen surprisingly is that we've seen emotional needs these are in big corporations, are in a pretty good place, a surprisingly good place. Yeah. More than we'd expected. We expected it actually to be worse, because there's been a lot of research coming out, predicting, mental health issues and so on and so forth. And we haven't seen as much as we should expect. But with the caveat, there are a small portion of people who are in a bad place, who are suffering quite intensely, but it's not as many as we expect.
Okay.
And in other research in big corporations has shown there's always somebody suffering. Again, that's we'd like that to be better, of course. That's why we kind of like push our model into corporations, because we say you can measure this and keep an eye on it all the time and proactively manage it. But what we found, particularly in this one organization, and it's unsurprising, but this concept of orientation, as we said, is knowledge, it's knowing about things. So this had dropped massively during the pandemic. Now, and one particular organization we were speaking to, it wasn't as if they had done nothing. They'd actually been done a lot of really positive things around it, but even they had underestimated how important some of these orientation mechanisms were. And also we saw with particular groups within the organization. So this is, kind of, there's a bunch of people who are doing like front office work. They needed it much less because they had daily interaction with people. So they're having much more daily interactions. And there was these back office people who were feeling much more left out and out of the loop. And just making some relatively small changes to information structures and making ritualized communication strategies in casual formats and in formal business formats. So formal business formats such as updating or team meetings, but more casual formats as in virtual coffee chats, or just really listening to what they need to feel, made a real big difference really quickly. So it's easy to underestimate. And because of many companies and same as governments, they've been in a slight panic mode. Oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to do virtual work, this work? How are we going to do it? Blah, blah, blah. Some things can very quickly get forgotten. They have a negative impact. And some of the ways of dealing with it sometimes are, I have to say, stupidly easy. So it doesn't, I mean, there can be more complex things and more things you have to think through, but there's a bunch of things which are really quite easy. If you look at the model, say, is it control? Is it orientation? Is it attachment? Is it pleasure? What can we do? What's the easiest way we can do something? You can get to something relatively or very easy, often very cheap, I have to say as well.
Yes, but these are good news, no? So, and it kind of reminds me what I also do in my work when I work with people who are really struggling with something. Entering the room and with positive intention, disrupting, the energy to a higher level by saying something which is unexpected also. So this disruption, where, you are bringing something new, it's not much, but, something sometimes unexpected that creates something that fulfills, this one of these emotional need is very powerful. So yeah. Excellent. So great. So it means that we have, a model to better understand our emotional needs and how we could use this information to move forward, whatever situation we are in. And we like that, right? We all like this idea that we can, move forward, whatever the environment. And we often say in coaching, you want to transform obstacles into opportunities. So it seems to be a nice way to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we talk about the broad concept of neuroleadership, there's like, I say we've brought it down. What we've done is we brought it down into one model that can be very simple. So the scope model can be very simple, but there's a lot of science behind it, so we can go into different complexities as well.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, there's various elements around that, you know, which, you know, so could it be sensitivity to fear, could it be achievement motivation, you know, is it based on past experiences? What is it based? Is it based on how we've anchored, you know, as in linked, you know, certain things to society, as you said, you know, this concept of, you know, is it actually an opportunity or other things? So there's obviously a bunch of other things we can do around it. What I'm saying is we need to have an operating model that is solidly founded on the science. That's what we've done, and then we can move out of that into also more refined or more complex areas.
It's a central model that you can then apply to different projects, and I know that you have many projects ongoing.
Yeah.
And one of my you know, my focus is, as well as yours, is high performance, right? So it's can you share a little bit more with us how you make the link between the motivation, the model you just shared, and high performance in general?
Yeah, so there's a couple of interesting things. I mean, the first thing, of course, we said is, you know, for the brain to be able to best use its own resources, it has to be in a good emotional state, or a relatively positive emotional state. So this is back to the emotional needs concept. You know, if your emotional needs are always damaged or challenged, you're never going to be in a position to be able to, you know, get the best out of your brain, because it, you know, limits, restricts, damages, stresses, just all sorts of things. So fulfilling emotional needs gives the environment for your brain to be able to perform to its best, and hence also grow to its best. Because if we look at plasticity, and I presume a lot of people know that the brain is plastic, you know, brain cells grow and they shrink, or the connections between brain cells grow and shrink. So, you know, this positive brain environment is also it's a positive place to be learning more and improving one's skills. Now, some interesting things around about what we noticed in high performance situations is, I spoke before about, you know, this concept of achievement and avoidance, you know, the fear side and the achievement side. And what we noticed in different contexts, there are different patterns of this, of how high performance translated. So, for example, if we went into the corporate world, this was initially against our expectations, because if I talk about achievement motivation or avoidance motivation, everyone would normally say achievement motivation is more important. It's kind of like with gut feeling, I would say, yeah, cool, that sounds like the thing you should be doing. What we found, though, is high performers, and sometimes also high performers in the sports place, have very high achievement motivation and very high avoidance motivation. So, and this surprised us initially. So, but again, if we think about motivational strategies, it's actually a double motivational strategy. You really want the good stuff.
Yeah.
So to put it into sports performance, you really want to win, but you really hate losing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So you've got both things coming together.
Yes.
But I suppose what we said is you have to have slightly more achievements than avoidance, because that gives the slightly positive twist.
Yeah.
The problems with avoidance motivation is it's always negative. It's always static. It's a non-movement situation. So you're protecting your position, you're protecting your status, and it can give you just pressure, and you try to resist the pressure. So it's a stressful situation. That's why I say achievement should always be slightly higher than protection, or protecting your needs or avoiding damage to your needs. What we have seen, though, is that it is an important thing to consider. And protecting your needs could just be standing up for yourself, or speaking out when you should speak out, or not letting people put you down. There could be things like this as well. It's not just being negative all the time. Just saying, okay, hey, whoa, I'm here. don't insult me. It's kind of can be that type of strong character as well. So this is what we noticed. So it is important to think about protecting your needs, and by this I mean standing up. Standing up for yourself or standing up for others. That is an important thing to have. But your achievement, you should be focused on the positive side rather than the negative side, because there's usually focus on the positive side. So you should search on the positive side. Now this is in corporate, this was in the corporate environment. So I have to stress this is corporate environment. This is high performers in business, but they're often these high performers, and not necessarily your classic senior leader, but sometimes they're the younger, very dynamic people as well. So it wasn't just measuring a senior leader; it's people who are classed as high performers or in high performance programs who are being kind of flagged as top performers. And some of these are much younger, much more dynamic people. So it's not just a senior leader problem. This was a high performance situation.
That's a very interesting topic, because it reminds me about different examples I have in my mind where I have observed the reaction of people in a specific setting where a lot was at stake, right? If you talk, maybe it's appreciated, maybe it's not, right? And for sure, the people who are more successful, and happy in their life, I have observed systematically, have, the balance between, the avoidance and, the thinking positively about trying something. It's very small difference, but that makes a whole difference.
Yeah, sometimes it's a small difference.
Prepare yourself, how you perceive what will happen, how you predict what's going to happen.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because if we look to building motivational patterns, it's what we've called motivational schema. So this of course all feeds back in. So if you fail, there's an automatic feedback circuit that kind of goes in and says, okay, I failed. So this is why thinking carefully through that, or obviously potentially reframing that as well is a concept, but but it is a feedback circuit. So managing that effectively is a good thing to have, because the more times you succeed, the more times it's good to have.
Yeah, I like what you said, because for those who are listening and don't know what is reframing, this is a powerful tool we use in coaching, where you are thinking about a situation in the past where you had a negative experience, let's say, okay? And you go back to this story, but you change the story so that, or you observe what's going on from a different perspective to give it a different flavor, so a more positive flavor, okay? And then, you memorize it differently. If you repeat that, you change your emotional attachment to it, and you give a more positive outlook to it, because even if we say, well, the past doesn't always equal the future, we have this ability to go back in the past and to remember painful situation, So, I see a lot of people block because they think about, they fail in a project, so they are really hesitant, to move forward and try again. But if you change, your perspective on what happened, and to make it more powerful for yourself, then you don't feel this resistance anymore, right? And
absolutely, and and if we went just back into the brain, say, okay, this is a psychological framing, but if we went back into the brain, then we say what actually is happening in the brain is we're triggering, reward circuits or the positive circuits, which lead to reinforcing circuits or reinforcing behaviors and giving you a better brain environment to keep doing that, and then a better potential wiring effect, connecting effect, learning effect. So again, this is where I say we can take the psychological and put it to the biological, and then it increases the importance of that, because it's essentially how the chemicals are being released in your brain, and the effects they're going to have also on future behaviors, as you said. Yeah. So that's an interesting aspect. There's a couple of interesting things around that, though. The one is that failure is sometimes super important for motivation. This has also been researched in sports areas where kind of like also big failures have been super motivational. But, and this is the key thing, this is now the interesting thing. Listen carefully. Because if they fail, what you have to have though, you have to have a sense of possibility. So you have to believe you can do it. So that's the important aspect. You know, failing, oh my God, I can't do it, you know, it's something else. But having that belief, and the most motivational circumstances are when you are not when it's certain. Some people have said certainty is important. Certainty is actually not important. Certainty actually decreases motivation. If you're going to have a certain outcome, you don't have to invest energy into it. It's kind of like, well, I'm going to get to, you know, same anything. If you're going for a business deal, you're going to get it anyway. You know, you don't invest the energy to write a great proposal. You know? But if you know you've got, you know, there's 2 or 3 of you going for that business deal, you invest a lot of energy into it. But you have to think you have the possibility of getting that.
I really like the difference to make between belief and certainty. I think it's very powerful because we often say also in coaching, you need 2 things to be happy and successful in life. You need to be clear about who you are and what you want, okay, the destination, and you need to believe 100%. You to believe you can, okay. So these are the 2 elements we are helping with in coaching. We are helping people with developing both, right? And yeah, I agree with you. When we are certain that we are going to get it, you know, we just, you know, okay.
Correct. It's a natural mechanism because the brain balances resources. So what you do, the brain is actually measuring resources and saying, how much should I invest in that? And basically the brain's mechanism is to save resources if it can. Because it's good for survival, you know. So if you can save energy, do save energy. You know, and this is research into dopamine, by the way. So dopamine, which is partly considered a reward chemical, but it's actually more motivational chemical. It drives energy and drives attention and direction. And dopamine is highest when there's a 50-50 chance of getting something. So you get the highest level with this 50-50 chance. And then if we look at the sports world, what do we see? We see the sports final is that really big motivational concept. You know, everyone's so motivated, the fans, the media, the teams themselves, because actually you're in essentially a 50-50 chance. Now, of course, sometimes there's a favorite or an underdog, but essentially you're in a 50-50 chance of getting gold or getting silver. So motivational levels are extremely high in those contexts, but you have to believe, of course, in the possibility. So once you take away possibility,
what we name the stretch and not the stress. And maybe I will have to invite you again to discuss about another topic, a related topic in my mind at least, because you said that naturally we try to save energy, okay, for survival. And at the same time, unfortunately, we see a lot of burnout, right, in society. At the workplace, people who are not anymore listening to their body, and you know, they are not triggering this mechanism of, you know, saving energy. So they are really overusing the brain, right, and the body as well, right, to try to achieve something. And do you have some insight for us around that?
So there's 2 or 3 things around burnout, but we go straight back to the emotional needs model, and again, the emotional needs model is built on Count Clover's work in psychotherapy. He did a bunch of good research into this as well. So essentially, his base theory was, and he formulated it slightly different to us because we took his research, compared it to bunches of other research, did some of our own research, and hence we came up with scope. But he said, basically, it's a violation of basic needs causes mental disruption. That's it. And you can link that to well-being. We did a piece of research in the workplace on well-being as well. So fatigue, energization, mental health, found very high correlations with disruption of emotional needs. So if your emotional needs are being unfulfilled, and worse is being violated. That means, so there's one, you can't fulfill your self-esteem, and there's the other one is you being put down by different people, or the environment is putting you down or lowering your self-esteem. So we say, first of all, always go to emotional needs, because if you can't fulfill your emotional needs, you're going to be in a bad place. That's just a natural stress reaction. The body is just going to go haywire in there. So it's and that's much more correlative to burnout or mental health or fatigue than amount of work you're doing or amount of responsibility you have. So if you do a lot of work but fulfill your emotional needs, you feel happy, exhausted. It's like when you finish this big long day and you complete everything and you've been successful. You know it if you've done a great workshop or a great coaching, you feel happy but tired.
I'm feeling good that we are at this stage of the discussion. We are coming back to with, it seems to me, at least, with what we started with, right? This emotions are at the core. In fact, they are really key for happiness and success and the workplace. So it's really, the key message, it seems to me, is really you need to take care about your emotional needs, to be aware of what's important for you and to focus on that to achieve the high performance, and also to...
Absolutely, yeah. So if we think of that, rather than saying, I have to work less or whatever, I mean, that could be the case as well. I mean, I'm not saying it's not the case, but I'm saying focus on fulfillment of emotional needs, because that's what drives fulfillment. You'll feel fulfilled if your emotional needs are fulfilled. If your emotional needs are not fulfilled, you'll feel unfulfilled or potentially really bad. So if you get emotional needs fulfillment, then you don't have to focus about the other stuff. Now, there is other stuff you should be doing. I wrote, you read the article I wrote on walking, so particularly in the pandemic when a lot of us are working at home, things like getting exercise are surprisingly important, because we're not getting it any other way. So I'd really, really strongly encourage people to get out and get walking or movement or some sort of exercise, because it's the way that the body needs it, simply put, and the brain needs it as well.
So at the moment, we are fulfilling, a need for understanding the topic and getting some, interesting tools. And I'm going to walk just after. I'm going to go outside and walk under, the nice sun. And I think really we sense that we need to take care about both, right? The need to understand, to exercise our brain, and as well also to make sure that we are feeling good. Our body is also, in good shape. So
absolutely, yeah. And we don't, or I don't. People talk about the brain and body. I actually don't see it as a separate system. I say it's one system. Rather than saying, the brain and the body, or the brain and the heart, or the brain, I say no, it's not. It's actually one interconnected system. So healthy in body, healthy in brain, healthy in brain, healthy in body. So they interact together, and there's the research recently has really exploded in multiple areas here, which are things like the gut-brain axis, even the skin-brain axis. There's all sorts of connections that are, and it's only logical because it's one body, and all the nerves and cells are interconnected. So it's one system. So as a some people always accuse me, you're the brain guy, and I say, well, actually, no, I believe as the human system is a system, and the brain plays a pretty big part in that, but a lot of other stuff. It's a part of the system.
Need to keep in mind that it's a system, and there are different elements, and we need to take care about these different elements in a holistic way. And at this stage, I would like to ask you, so what's your key project for the coming year?
So as I explained to you previously, I've really set my position in the field is there's lots of people out there doing some sort of brain stuff, or the simple brain hacks and stuff. So I said, that's not my position. My position is giving good quality synthesized contents, which has a lot of meat on it. So I give a lot of meat. I give quality.
Yeah.
So that's my position, is on content expertise. I've set up a bunch of online courses, which again, I say it's synthesized knowledge. I'm a believer in quality knowledge, but synthesized knowledge. So I like stuff that has enough content to be genuine, to be well researched, to have a good background, to be not oversimplistic, but still accessible, readable. So I've developed a bunch of online courses. These are previous courses I was pre-pandemic also running in person, but that's all online now. My new baby in 2021 is I've launched an e-magazine. So this is a monthly magazine, and that gives a bunch of articles, as I said, concise, well-researched, readable articles on multiple topics. The topics are the brain, different areas of leadership in the brain. So that's senior leadership, team leadership, and personal leadership. Brains in society, brains in learning. So that's in education concepts, and brains in health. So these health concepts. So that's my new e-magazine, which is my new baby. Probably have to stress I'm going to limit subscription to that at some stage, so it's freely accessible at the moment. But once
people listening,
people are listening, so once we hit the 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to.
You need to reach pretty quickly. So, what is the best way to reach to you if they want to follow up on your work and connect with you?
So it's the website, which is leading-brains.com.
Okay, wonderful. Excellent. So we are almost at the end. I can't believe we are almost at the end
flies.
of the time. Yeah, I mean it was really rich of a lot of insightful elements, information, and to wrap up, if people want to keep in mind something important for them to feel good, to fulfill their emotional needs in 2021, what is your key message?
I would look at those 5 needs, self-esteem. I would just, for yourself, just write down what you want to have, what you need to have to fulfill self-esteem, what you need to have for control, can you take control. Give yourself some clear orientations that set some clear, as we said, realistic, possible goals as are possible. Look after your relationships, keep those relationships well, and do make sure you have some pleasure as well and enjoy different parts of your life. Because again, if you've got those things, you're going to have a happier brain.
Excellent.
So I'd really come back to those 5 things.
Okay, thank you so much, Andy. It has been really a pleasure to talk with you. It went very, very fast, and
I know we could always speak for hours. I know.
I mean, I think this. We can never emphasize enough. The how key is this topic of emotion. Especially. It has been, not always very present in the workplace, but it's so important, okay, to feel good in the environment you are in, to have this positive outlook on things. We also say gratitude, right? So focus on what we have.
Yeah.
Focus on what we have, and each time I do that, I feel good, right? So it's really abundance, what we say abundance. So focus on what you have, your skills, what makes you unique, and capitalize on that. And then, things are easier, right?
It's energizing, the strength.
Looking for positive energy instead of looking on what we are missing, because yes, we are missing things on the moment. As soon as we focus on what's pleasant for ourselves now, what we are happy about, then we find a way, and this will help all of us moving forward. So
without question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, these this goes into another topic of attentional patterns in the brain. The brain focuses
Yeah.
attention, and then starts to drown out the other noise and just focus on certain areas. And there's a couple of mechanisms how that happens, but that's why refocusing on the positives is also an important thing to do. And then that frees up a lot of, I say, energy, emotion, focus, attention, cognitive resources, ability.
The energy. Excellent. So maybe we could, end the live on this word. Yeah. Thanks again, Andy. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you, Christine. Thanks. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye to all and talk soon.